Mike Reynolds woke up to the sound of fists slamming against his front door. It was 2 a.m., and through his security cameras he saw them. 5 men in tactical gear, faces obscured by shadows, patches on their jackets reading HOA enforcement, which was not a thing. Then came the voice, sharp and commanding. "This is an HOA enforcement action. Open the door, or we'll be forced to enter." They thought they had power. They thought he'd be scared. After all, this was how they controlled the neighborhood, with fear, intimidation, and bogus rules that no one dared to challenge. And at the top of it all, Karen Whitmore, the queen of HOA corruption, pulling the strings from her ivory tower. She had spent years extorting homeowners, fabricating fines, and crushing anyone who stood in her way. But here's the thing about power. It only works if the other side plays by the rules. Mike wasn't just some ordinary homeowner, and they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives, because he was about to turn their little empire into dust. But let's start from the beginning. Mike Reynolds had always been a quiet, law-abiding man. A former federal agent turned security consultant, he had chosen Oak Ridge Estates for its promise of peace and stability. A nice, quiet neighborhood where he could finally relax after years in high-stress environments. But what looked like a suburban paradise on the surface, it was anything but. It started small, just enough to be annoying. $50 fine for leaving his trash bin out an hour too late, $100 for parking his own truck in his driveway instead of the garage. Petty, sure, but nothing worth fighting over. He paid the first couple, thinking it was just the price of living in an HOA-controlled neighborhood. But then came the letter. A thick, certified envelope from the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association landed in his mailbox one afternoon. The paper inside, stamped in bold red letters, claimed that he owed $5,000 in unpaid violations. Mike frowned. What violations? He flipped through the list. Unauthorized modifications, failure to maintain landscaping, improper parking, all completely bogus. They were charging him for things that had never happened. And the kicker? Failure to comply will result in further escalation. At the bottom of the page, in neatly printed cursive, was a signature. Karen Whitmore, HOA President. Now, let me tell you about Karen. If you've ever met someone who thinks a clipboard and a whistle make them a supreme authority, you know the type. She wasn't just some bored suburban mom playing neighborhood cop. She was running a full-blown racket. Karen had installed herself as the self-proclaimed enforcer of the HOA rules, treating the community like her personal kingdom. She had a tight inner circle of enablers, a few power-hungry board members, and her husband, Jeff, who took on the role of HOA security. Their scam? Fining homeowners for made-up infractions, forcing them to pay, and pocketing the cash. Mike wasn't one to back down. He requested a meeting with Karen, expecting some kind of explanation. Instead, he got pure arrogance. Karen sat across from him at the HOA office, arms folded, a smug smile plastered across her face. "These fines are non-negotiable, Mr. Reynolds." Mike raised an eyebrow. "Non-negotiable? You're charging me for violations that never happened." Karen sighed dramatically, flipping through a stack of papers she clearly hadn't even read. "The board reviewed your case, and it stands. If you don't pay, we'll escalate." Mike leaned forward. "Escalate how?" That's when Karen's smile turned sharper. "We have ways of dealing with non-compliant homeowners." Now, most people would hear that and get scared, maybe even back down. But Mike? He had interrogated criminals, busted international smuggling rings, and dealt with people far more dangerous than a wannabe dictator in a pantsuit. That was a threat. And if she thought he was going to roll over like the others, she was dead wrong. That night, Mike didn't just ignore the letter. He prepared. While most of the neighborhood was winding down for the night, Mike was securing his property. Hidden security cameras went up on his front porch, garage, and backyard, all streaming directly to his phone. He reinforced his doors, double-checked his locks, and set up motion sensors. His instincts screamed that this wasn't over. And he was right. 2 weeks later, it happened. It was 2 a.m. when a sudden, thunderous banging on the front door shattered the silence. The sound was relentless, fists slamming against wood, demanding entry. Mike snapped awake instantly. Years in law enforcement had conditioned him to react fast and clear-headed. He didn't move recklessly. Instead, he reached for his phone, already pulling up the security feed. What he saw made him pause. 5 men, dressed in black. They stood spread out on his porch, their faces partially covered by dark caps and tactical gear. But the strangest part? They weren't wearing police uniforms. Instead, bold white patches on their jackets read, HOA Enforcement, which was not a thing. Mike's lips curled into a smirk. He had worked alongside actual law enforcement. These guys? Fakes. Amateurs. Wannabes. Then a voice barked through the door. "This is an HOA enforcement action. Open the door or we'll be forced to enter." Forced to enter? Oh, that was cute. Mike didn't bother responding. Instead, he dialed the real police. As the call connected, he moved swiftly to his gun safe, retrieving his federal badge and sidearm. Calm. Efficient. Unshaken. This was a joke. With his weapon at his side, not raised, not threatening, just ready, he unlocked the door and cracked it open an inch, just enough for them to see his unimpressed expression. "You guys are trespassing." One of the men stepped forward, and there he was, Jeff Whitmore, Karen's husband, HOA's unofficial muscle, a man who had no actual authority but liked to pretend he did. Jeff's face lit with smug confidence. "You've been refusing to pay your fines, Reynolds. That makes you a problem. We're here to secure assets for the HOA." Mike tilted his head. "You mean you're stealing from me?" Jeff's smirk twitched. "HOA has authority over all properties in this community. You should have read the rules." That's when Mike held up his badge, letting the golden federal emblem glint under the porch light. "Federal authority trumps HOA nonsense. You and your goons are committing armed burglary." One of the men visibly stiffened. Another swallowed hard. Then, sirens. Red and blue lights flashed through the night. The real cops had arrived. The second the flashing red and blue lights splashed across the dark street, the so-called HOA enforcement team froze in place like deer caught in headlights. The once confident thugs in tactical vests now looked like a bunch of kids about to get detention, except this detention came with handcuffs and felony charges. But Jeff Whitmore? Oh, he still had fight in him. Puffing out his chest, he stepped forward, putting on his best tough guy act as 2 uniformed officers approached. "We're an official HOA security force," he declared, his voice dripping with self-importance. "We were enforcing community rules." Yeah, that didn't fly. Sergeant Diaz, a no-nonsense cop who had seen it all, didn't even blink. She crossed her arms, looking unimpressed. "Nice try," she said flatly. "HOA doesn't have the authority to raid anyone's home. You're under arrest for trespassing, attempted burglary, and impersonating law enforcement." And just like that, Jeff's confidence cracked. The other officers immediately crumbled. One of them dropped his fake badge, another ripped off his tactical vest, and a third just threw his hands up in surrender. No more tough guy act. But the real show? That was about to start. Because just as the cops were cuffing Jeff, a new voice tore through the night. "This is discrimination!" Oh, here we go. Karen Whitmore came storming out of her house, bathrobe flapping, hair disheveled, voice shrill enough to shatter glass. "You can't arrest my husband. This is an abuse of power. We were only enforcing the rules." Mike watched as Sergeant Diaz turned to her with the patience of a kindergarten teacher dealing with a tantrum. "The only thing your husband is enforcing," Diaz said dryly, "is a jail sentence." And that? That was when Mike decided to twist the knife. Stepping forward, calm and collected, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick manila folder. "And while we're at it," he said, "let's talk about those fraudulent fines and illegal HOA fees." Karen froze. Mike held up the folder just long enough for Diaz to take it, her brows furrowing as she flipped through the contents. Inside, bank statements showing suspicious withdrawals, fake violation notices. And the smoking gun? Emails. Emails where Karen explicitly instructed her board to fabricate charges against homeowners. Silence. Then a slow, knowing smirk spread across Sergeant Diaz's face. "Well, well, well," she murmured, snapping the folder shut. "Looks like we're adding fraud and embezzlement to the list." Karen's face drained of color. Ghost white. She knew she was done. By morning, the entire town was talking. News vans crowded the entrance to Oak Ridge Estates, reporters scrambling for interviews. Homeowners peered out their windows, some standing in small clusters along the sidewalks, talking in hushed, excited tones. The HOA, the very organization that had ruled over them with an iron fist, had finally collapsed. And at the center of it all, Karen and Jeff. The headlines were brutal. HOA president and husband arrested for fraud and impersonation. Mike couldn't help but smirk as he flipped through the channels. Every station had the same mugshots. Karen's face was pale and stunned, her usual sharp, superior expression replaced by something else entirely: panic. The once power-hungry woman who ruled the HOA like a queen now sat in a jail cell, stripped of her authority, awaiting trial. And Jeff? Oh, he looked even worse. The man who had barged onto Mike's porch in the middle of the night, barking orders like a self-proclaimed lawman, now had his own hands cuffed behind his back. Gone was the tough guy act. Reality had hit him hard. But it wasn't just the two of them going down. Because the moment Karen and Jeff were arrested, the entire HOA board started turning on each other. At first, they tried to stay quiet, tried to protect themselves. But with Karen in jail, there was no more fear. And as soon as the first board member cut a deal with investigators, the rest started talking. And oh, did they talk. Emails, text messages, fake violation notices, intentionally inflated fines, and misuse of HOA funds. It was worse than anyone imagined. Karen had been running a full-fledged extortion scheme. For years, she had been slapping homeowners with fake fines, forcing them to pay and pocketing the money. Anyone who refused faced harassment, threats, and bogus legal action. And now, it was all out in the open. Within a month, Oak Ridge Estates held an emergency meeting. The vote was unanimous. The HOA was officially dissolved. The homeowners, who had spent years trapped under Karen's rule, finally had their freedom back. And the stolen money? Oh, it was coming back. With the evidence in hand, a massive lawsuit was filed. The court ordered full restitution. Every illegally charged fine was to be returned. Homeowners got their money back. And Karen? She lost everything. Her position, her home, her reputation, her bank accounts, drained by legal fees and restitution payments. As for Mike, he watched it all unfold from his front porch, a fresh cup of coffee in hand. The morning air was crisp, the neighborhood quieter than it had been in years. No more ridiculous violation notices, no more fake fines, no more HOA tyranny. And honestly, It felt good. Then, a familiar voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Mike?" He turned to see an older neighbor standing by the fence, a man Mike had seen around but never really spoken to. The man hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck, then finally spoke. "I just wanted to say thank you. Those people were ruining this place." Mike just chuckled, taking a slow sip of his coffee. All in a day's work. Justice was served. And Oak Ridge Estates? It would never be the same again.